Hello and welcome. So today I want to do, I kind of did a response. I did a short on just that I'm selling my land area. And I had somebody comment about, whether or not I'm lying about the taxes or whatever. And so I thought, I'll put out like a response on that. It's a good point that I haven't really brought the receipts. So, I decided I'd put out a thing and it ended up being like an hour and 22 minutes. And I thought, it's actually pretty good. There's a couple things where I kind of struggled to like figure out what I was doing with my spreadsheet and deciphering that for a second, and just a kind of a poor quality because it was just looking at a spreadsheet most of the time that was kind of dead. And so now I've got some kind of random images going in the background there. I'll pull, excuse me, I'll pull up the spreadsheet here in a moment, but I kind of wanted to talk about just kind of, I've got 20 years experience playing virtual worlds. I've got this virtual land that I'm selling for $15,000. It's really confusing for a lot of people on the concept, just even grasping what it is. And it's understandable. It's not it just sounds shady, that you're playing a video game and making money and you don't have to work. Something's off, But no, it's a thing that I ran across, and so I kind of want to go over some of the details because it is an important factor that my experience with the game has been a journey of data exploration, of like figuring it out. It's not so much been a game for me as a challenge. And like everybody, I've had my bad years, but I've made a lot of improvements. I credit a lot of that to the competitiveness of the players in this game. Crafters, for example, there was a group of Russian crafters that were pretty ruthless early on in the years of the game, and they were very effective at what they did. And I have a lot of respect for them because even though they were ruthless, it was efficient. It's a real cash game. So I guess I'll kind of start back on a little bit of history of where I came from the game. So I started the game in, I think it was 2006. The reason I started playing the game is a kind of a suggestion from medical doctors that I need to do something active to get I was kind of like an invalid, not functional. We did some experimental stuff, got me back in functioning, but I kind of needed to work on like everything. There was about 90% memory loss. So there's a lot of things I needed to work on. And one of the suggestions was like something like a video game or some kind of activity that I could do that could kind of help with elasticity kind of stuff. And my buddy had read this article in some magazine about a guy who mortgaged his house, and he mortgaged his house to buy a virtual asteroid for like $120,000, I think it was. And this is like my old high school buddy who kind of knew I was going through some shit, and he was just like, if there's a game, this is one's really really interesting, and that one really kind of piqued my interest because one, I've been a pretty diehard gamer kind of all my life. My first game was a play by mail worldwide game that was you mailed in your turns, and then 2 weeks later they would gather all the turns of all it was 40 countries across the entire map of the world, and each country you could pick a tech tree of World War II tech of like Russians, Germans, Japanese, American, British, Canadian, and you say I'm going to be Switzerland with Canadian tech, and then it was an interesting thing because you'd run it over like some of them were years, but it was play by mail. You'd like literal post office, like put a stamp on your mail and go mail it off. That's why every turn was like 2 weeks long. So it was like a really interesting, it's like the first kind of MMO that I ever played before MMOs even existed because it was multiplayer. There were people from all over the world. So I've been familiar with this kind of world gaming concept for a very long time. That was back in the 90s, even in the 80s. I think it was like 87 they started that. A place called Rolling Thunder Games. Kind of interesting game history. So I've always been into games. And so he knew that. And then I've also always been into real estate. Ever since I was like a teenager, we've had most of the commercial buildings in this town, like a lot of residential, we've flipped over the years or lived in or whatever. But so a lot of real estate experience. So the article kind of piqued a lot of interest. Piqued my two main interests. One, it's a video game, and then there's like a virtual real estate thing going on. So I started playing with it. And at the time that I was playing, I had just gone through a medical deal where I had a bankruptcy that they had filed on my behalf while I was not functioning. And they basically did this bankruptcy over like $8,000 or something. It was kind of dumb. But it was a 10-year bankruptcy. And with that, I couldn't get credit. So I couldn't get a credit card. I couldn't get a loan, So it really was like I couldn't afford. It's not like I had a bunch of money that I could throw into the game. It just wasn't there because I was raising three kids at the time. So my buddy tells me about this game, and I think, okay, I'll start playing it, and I just start, figuring it out, and kind of going into a little bit of the historical where I have formulated my basis of theory and how I've played and how it will apply to the land here in a bit. This may be a long video, so bear with me, but I hope it's interesting for people because there's a lot of key aspects of the game historically that a lot of people missed. They never experienced it. And I've been doing this, like I said, 2006. I haven't had a job. This is all I've done. You guys have seen me stream 10-hour streams. You guys have seen me every day playing the game. So at least there are plenty of people who know that, this is really all I did for a very, very long time. So back then, the forums were a really interesting place because it's a tight knit community. Forums were kind of big all over the internet. There was a forum for everything. And the Calypso forums was actually like a really fun place. It was a really interesting group of people. Kind of like pioneers of this new realm. Pretty neat little place. But there was one guy that put a post one day, and it'll lead into a couple of my kind of sidebars of why the land is beneficial. But this guy it's a random guy. He puts a post on one of the things, and it didn't last long or anything. And I don't even know if it was right or accurate, but it was just a post on the internet in relation to the game. And the premise was, Mindark fired me, and I'm sour. And here's the loot algorithm. And so there was a 14 variable algorithm, and I don't remember all the details. I think I have it printed down somewhere. I mean, I know I have it like on my website. I think a couple places and some other places, but it was just like a 14 variable algorithm. But the thing that I noticed about it, the thing that stuck out was stamina was in there three times. And I thought that's really interesting. And it's fairly new at the game. There wasn't much, stamina wasn't like, back then people started at one, or was it 10? We started at 10, but I don't think there were any players past like 40 stamina for the first many, many years of the game because the other thing that I kind of noticed that was interesting is that when they started pushing the missions, the last reward of the 10,000 kills was stamina. So it's like for whatever reason, they're signaling stamina is important, and we're going to reward you with the stamina because of your hard work. So they placed a value on it, basically, of only the players that complete the hardest tasks get part of this pie. So things started clicking with me on stamina. And back in 2007, I did kind of the spring hunting competition, I think it was, and the Champions League, and the 2007 Spring Challenge was like the precursor to Big. And so some of this stuff is kind of historical. It's kind of neat to know about the game. But Big, everybody knows in the game, there's the big BIG that ran all those land areas and events all those years. The precursor to that was that Spring Hunting Challenge, which was kind of like the original members of the Big, where there was a group of landowners who got together and said, let's do an event. We'll pay somebody big money, and then we'll get all these players to come generate stuff. And it was 2008. It was good times. Guns were selling for $20,000. There were some crazy loots that were happening. There was a lot of cycling going on. There were things like in-game advertising that were helping to fuel things. It was a really interesting time in the game. And let me see here. Where am I going with this? So in so Yeah, I'm trying to think of what's the so these events that were being run. It was basically a Neo Maven, and I allegedly, I don't know for sure. I'm These guys were involved with Mindark, allegedly. In any case, they were Swedish, and Mindark is Swedish, so friends of friends, or just whatever it was, that these guys were founders. They had lands, they had the weapons, they had the stuff, connected in some manner. Whether they were just the OG players, I don't know the exact story, but they were definitely connected, and kind of led to the whole Big group, which really kind of fueled a lot of events in the game. I mean, I ran a lot of events over the years that supplemented my losses, and it's kind of where the game gets a lot of shade, is that it's really up to the player to figure it out. It's the hardest game in the world for that reason, because you're at a disadvantage from the get-go and they're not helping you. So it's up to you to kind of look at the patterns and like see what's going on. And most people will go to the forums, or they'll go to the generalized Ubers in the game, and everybody's got a theory, and everybody's got an idea of how it works in the background. But the really interesting thing, and it's kind of what goes back to what started this video, which is, someone is telling me that I'm lying about the taxes, because there's a big. It's been a, not a brick wall, but it's been like a speed bump in trying to explain to people how the game works over the years. And I've tried, I've done this on streams, and there's plenty of times, I've done a lot of threads where I try to explain how the tax system works, and people really don't get it, and that's kind of why I'm doing this. So I'm trying to, the best way I can, kind of give the historical context of how this is all kind of come to be. Because back then, I won some of those events, but they were like the Spring Hunting Challenge, for example. It was run by Neo Maven and the group, and it was a couple different lands. And I mostly had focused on, like, I think it was the Formicata land for that event. But it was Striker. There was a player called Striker, and most of the older players will know exactly who it is. Very good player. He had kind of made the news, because he was, made the round. Everybody knew him because that year he had gotten kill strike within like a year, which was unheard of. It was like, wow, he's like one of the top players all of a sudden out of nowhere. And it was gameplay that really pushed me because he was winning that event all over the place. And it was him that pushed me into playing to try to match to see how is he winning? Like how is this working for him and how is this not working for me? And it's kind of that's kind of the origin of this is the challenge is that somehow there's a cost to this game and I'm losing my ass and I don't know how. And I want to know how. And so I started a website, and you'll see some of these images on here between my website and the game and whatever. But I started a website and I started putting like databases together, and then I started a C sharp program, which is basically just a log parser for the chat log with multi-threading and all that stuff because the chat log is actually very complicated for Entropia because of all the different channels. It's not something a simple chat log parser can handle because of the sheer volume of data. So it has to be kind of carefully done. And I have a really cool software solution for that, and I'm really proud of it. But it was that's the whole purpose. It was I'm kind of losing my ass, and this striker guy is like, how did he do that? Like, how did he do that, and how am I not doing that? What am I missing? And so I started going out on this thing of equating. Well, this is real money, and I can't really afford to put the real money in, but real money is very important when I'm poor, you know. So documentation of the game seemed to me that the more data I could get, the better chance I have of deriving how it's all working in the background. So that's the idea of the chat logger. That's the idea of the website is it grabs everything from the chat log, all of my DPS data, all of the evade data, all of the miscellaneous things, and then it also grabs the screenshots of the globals and the screenshots of various different things that might have happened, and grabs the location out of the screenshot and maps it to the database on my website. And so there's a lot of complicated stuff. It was a really awesome project. For one, kind of learning how to program, but for two, for coming up with a lot of really cool solutions. Because I like for the mining, for example, it was one of my greatest things. Is like when I could actually start seeing my live mining maps on the website as I mined, and then knowing that it's there forever. I'm not going to lose that data. I could always go back on it and see, and analyze it in different ways later, use AI, whatever it is. But the whole idea is persistent data. I want to have it. I want to keep it, and I want to have as big of a data set as possible. And so that's kind of where I went with the website and the program that I made. But that's where I started was this event system. Was Striker was doing it, and I won that event that year. It was like 20,000 ped, which is huge because it really helped me kind of move forward. And then the other thing that I stumbled upon early in the game was crafting, because I've always been kind of a crafter in like EverQuest or Lotro or kind of any other games. I've always been a real big crafter. Eve Online, I've got like billions of Trisk worth of crafting stuff, and it's kind of crazy how much I've always really enjoyed crafting in games. Anyway, so I started picking up. I stumbled upon the crafting, and I stumbled upon the mining amps early in the game. And the mining amps is kind of where for one, it covered my losses in hunting, because hunting was when you're first starting out, the odds are all against you. Your efficiency is low. That you don't understand the tax system. The tax system is against you at all times, even though people will say it's not, which is kind of why we're here. So there's a lot of things that are at play, especially early on. That especially if you just don't pay attention to it, you're never really going to figure it out, and then it's going to be too late, because there's a certain point to where like the skill gains and stuff become so far and few between, or so spread out, that to derive the information off of that like extended data is it's trickier. You know, it's not as good of a data set as the early the early parts of your career or whatever it is. And so that's kind of the basis of my whole idea is I need to start gathering data. And around it, that was 2007, and I had won that, and I stumbled upon crafting. And then with crafting, I started doing the mining amps, and that became like a really, really crazy lucrative thing because back then people were buying mining amps. I mean, I was listing full pages every hour, just people buying them, and they were like at 125% markup just for like level fives, level sevens, little basic ones, or what they were back then is OA 104 or EA. It was a different naming structure, but they were very lucrative. I mean, if you knew how to make them, it was basically me and Buzz and Aktuma back then. And Aktuma actually bought some of my stuff because he didn't quite have all of the attachment stuff. He was like the guy who did my Phantom armor back then because he was like the Uber crafter back then. He was the guy that inspired me to even kind of really follow it through because I could see how well he was doing. And so I did have a kind of a relationship with him, and then some of the other crafters. And because it's mining amps, I did have a relationship with like some landowners, and then Never Die on the asteroid that I got into the game about because of the fact that there was an event that he did, a Champions League event that I did up there with them. And there, we were kind of cordial, because I make mining amps, that sustains a landowner, and his domes back then were making such a killing with mining amps. I'm pretty sure he pretty much loved any crafter who made amps back then because, we craft amps, they get spent on his domes. It was good times for everybody back then. But so there's a little bit of a cordial relationship because of that, kind of like a bit on the business side of things. And then there was the event that he did, which was the Champions League in 2007. And there's a card on there, and it's a really kind of interesting story on how I further expanded my knowledge on the game and stuff. But it was like a real card, 52 card deck, like eight, two through ace, and every player that was part of this Champions League that placed in it gets a card, and then he sent these cards out to everybody for like $35 or $50. I forget what it was. Some kind of money because there was shipping, and he was living off of like Hollywood Boulevard at the time, so he had to ship them from California to halfway around the world for a lot of these people. Because the interesting thing about this game is Americans are actually in a minority, so it's a world game, and you're running across people from all over. So it's really interesting. It's been really awesome. Like I say, the Russians, amazing gamers. In Eve, they were also amazing gamers. I learned a lot from them in Eve. I used to do the bookmarking back before they even had bookmarks, or warp to zero and all that shit. I made billions of ISK doing that, and a lot of that was doing the 00 Russian Federation mapping theirs so that I could sell them the maps so that they could get through so that they could distribute it among all their members, and then they didn't have to have some dude do it anyway. So that's kind of my first experience with Russian gamers. Very organized, very serious, very competitive, and I've really valued it because you learn a lot from things like that. And the crafters, they were really ruthless, and I became ruthless. I am kind of a ruthless crafter in that way, admittedly, because ultimately, like I say, the realization came down to it's real money, and you either got to figure it out or you're just spending real money. So with real money, you got to capture data. With these events, I was kind of making some money on the side, and I was learning a bit about the hunting side of things, and then I was also kind of crafting, and the crafting really kind of was my bread and butter. When I cashed out in 2008. So a little bit more about the history on how all this kind of ties in. But so it's 2008, and I cashed out because the housing market had started going kind of crazy. But to me, that's our opportunity. So I took everything out and I cashed. I think it was 250,000 skill points at that point back in 2008. Man, if I kept those and kept playing, I mean, it was I was doing pretty good at that point. And then I cashed it all down to 5,000 hit points or 5,000 skill points. And it took a while. It took a while to sell those skills. But back then, those skills were really, I mean, some of those were like 8,000, 9,000%. I think a couple were 14,000%. Some of the crafting ones, especially like Octuma bought a bunch of them. Buzz was buying them. There was a Chilix. Chilix bought a lot of my stuff. And he ended up being a crafter for a while until because I returned. But so I sold everything, sold all my blueprints, sold all my skills. So I pretty much was done. I was like, okay, I'm taking my money. I'm out of here. I felt like I'd won because it was like 25,000 bucks, which was everything I had. And the idea was I'd take the 25,000. I was really lucky because I had no credit. My bankruptcy, I can't get a loan, can't get anything, but I see the opportunity in the market. I find a guy who's willing to do the financing. So I'm like, okay, I'll do the repair side of the things. You do the financing side of the things. You don't worry about anything but the financing. I don't worry about anything but the repair. And when we sell, we'll split whatever we get. If I do my job, we'll do more. And that's what we did. And it worked out good because I couldn't do anything still. So I was able to hire some buddies or hire people that I had worked with in the past and at least, forward off some work to people that way. But at least I knew that they were cheap. They were good enough and cheap enough to get it done. As long as I could, make sure that everything was covered right. And then within the budget, that's the whole main part of it is trying to maintain the budget. So it was a little, it was interesting, but we did that and we ended up doing like 6 flips, I think it was 7 flips maybe. But it was like that 25 turned to 40 and then that 40 turned to 60 and then that 60 turned to. So it went up. And then before you know it, I was buying a condo in cash, 2010, I believe. And it was a $130,000 short sale. And the short sale was because it was a investment group that had bought into the whole we're going to buy the dip, but they didn't know how to manage anything. So it was an out of state. I don't even remember where they were from, but it was an out of state thing. They didn't know anybody here. They didn't know how to hire anybody apparently. But the deal was when I found the property, it looked like a crack house. It looked horrible. I mean, the pictures that this whoever took the pictures did it the worst, horrible possible job you could do on a pictures ever. It just made it look like that's probably why nobody wanted to see it because it just looked that bad. And I went to go see it because it was like $130,000. You can only get it on short sale, which means you have to have cash. And I just had enough cash. So I was like, I got to check this out. And then I get in there and I'm just amazed at the fact that the only thing wrong with it is the pictures. It's like where they took pictures of one of the rooms, the only room that had wallpaper, and the wallpaper was half tearing off the wall. So it looked like a Chernobyl fucking apartment complex. It looked bad, but it's just wallpaper. So, by the time I got the cosmetic part of it was so easy. You take down the wallpaper, you repaint it. It was all brand new, like new carpet. I didn't even redo the kitchen. There's like some new appliances. I did a new furnace. They paid for the new furnace to get rid of it because I had asked for some ridiculous stuff like a new furnace and a new electrical panel, which was really all it. It's just a condo. That's the water heater is the only other thing that is really that critical. And so anyway, we get this, and I get the place, and it's a cash for keys thing. The guy apparently he didn't wasn't paying his rent for like 2 years or whatever it was to these people to this investment group, and they didn't know how to evict him apparently or whatever, but they gave him cash at my closing for him to give me the keys because he wasn't giving him the keys. He wasn't even letting them in. So they didn't even. So that's the other part of it is they couldn't even go in and see it because he was living there. But by the time that it was on sale, it was for sale and all that stuff. As a buyer, I could get in there. They weren't even from around here to like look. I don't even know how they fucked it up, but it was a great deal for me. But ultimately, it's all Entropia money because it's the $25,000 I pulled out of Entropia, flipped that into houses, but it's still the Entropia money. It wouldn't have come from anywhere else. So, in a way, the Entropia money I took out in 2008 starts me off in 2010. Maybe it was 2012. No, it was 2012 when I got it. I came back to the game in 2008 or 2010. So the interesting thing about how I came back to the game was that those events that I was talking about, Never Dies event where he did the card decks, I paid for 5 decks and I only got 2. And he had, like I said, he had sent them from Hollywood Boulevard. That's where he was living at the time. And I didn't really think of it. But then one day I was kind of, it was like 2 years later, 2010. And I was kind of thinking around and I was like, I think he owes me like $150 because I think it was like $50 per deck, something like that. But I had overpaid 3 decks. And so I thought, double check. Maybe it was $50. I don't remember what it was. I thought I'll double check and I'll see, what. You never know. So I logged in with kind of no intention of playing at all. And I just kind of like happened to see he's still on my friends list because I used to be a crafter of amps and because we used to do, events. And, there's a little bit of enough of a history to where he was on my chat list. So I chat. And I'm like, hey, man, I know you probably don't remember. You don't have to, whatever. I just thought I'd ask. But there was those 3 decks. He's like, oh, yeah, no problem. I remember that. I got you covered. And so he paid me back. No questions asked. Really respect that. And it's hard to explain. Like, to me, that's a big thing. Like, I really respect that. And to show you, I mean, I own a land area on his planet. I own a shop on his planet. And I own one of the instances on a planet. That's how much respect I have for the fact that he paid me back on that. Because if he didn't, I mean, my life would be quite different, for one. And then for 2, I don't know. I mean, I always liked the guy. He's a quirky guy, but he's always been stand up. He's always had good intentions. He's a player. He's always gotten a bad rep for... He's had some of the best events that MindArt could have ever dreamed about having for the game, and they kind of fucked up his own. They kind of got in his way. To me, it seems like they kind of slighted him in ways that they could have avoided. They, I don't think he felt valued for what he did and what like the people. I had my old social mate and her husband. Well, it's my old social leader and her husband. They ran the Soch back and then when they did the noob OJ runs to the rig. That was our society, and it was like those guys organized a lot of that stuff. But they lived in Florida, and like they did like PR events They went to PR events for Never Die, where he was promoting the game, like clubs and like all kinds of stuff. So like they partied with Never Die out in Florida because of the fact that he was so active in the, you know, I am my avatar. I'm the virtual reality guy. He really should have. I mean, it's really kind of it's such an interesting story. And it's kind of a shame that people kind of like, oh, it's a video game, and therefore, and then he got some flack for some shit that happened, some events on his planet, which I don't think he controlled entirely, but he's one of those guys where he's not out to hurt anybody. He's trying to make things right. He's trying to do it right. He's putting his heart into it. He's got this whole system he came up with the mining of the cocktails and the mobs and the loot and the music tie-in and the Motorhead is involved and the Kevin Rudolph rapper is involved and he did so much on that front that people just don't respect it, and he needs more respect for that because it's undervalued. But I really respected it because he didn't have to, and I'm kind of a poor guy at that point still. I mean, I just bought that condo, but, that's really all I had at that point. That's the only thing I'm living on. I have no other income. I'm not working. I'm raising 3 kids. It's a big change in my life already that I've got this condo all of a sudden that I've got free and clear that I'm collecting rent. Finally, I've got some money. So anything that's ever come into the game is also a result of whatever I made from the game because it's always been the rent money. It's been the only source of capital into the game, and then the only source of capital out for like stocks or the Cybertruck or other things comes from the game, which came from the game, which came from the game. So it's such a bizarre kind of depth. But so here we are. So I've got Never Die paying me back, and I'm starting to play the game. And the thing about Striker that I really learned was that it's like a sine wave, and it's changed. It used to be more profound. It used to be more easily detected. But if you can imagine like a sine wave where you've got this kind of up and down curve kind of thing, the loot follows these strange waves in different ways. They kind of overlap each other, and there's different aspects of the cycle. Like at least back then, it was kind of like your player has a cycle, and the mobs have a cycle, and the time that you spend within those cycles became important. Is kind of what I learned from Striker, at least back then. And what it came down to is that you scheduled your runs with a certain amount to be within a certain period to be the most efficient within the sine waves. Because you don't want to be on the sine wave where you're losing the most at the very beginning and you're losing the most at the very end. You don't want to be catching the bad end of the stick on both sides. You want to be on the other side of the loop where you're catching a majority of the biggest part of the curve during your window. But you're not also giving up part of the variable of the curve that will average out over time. So it's not like it's a regular sine wave that's always constant. It's more like a variable wave that you really can only see like the overall pattern of it as you zoom out. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of how I'll explain it. So there's these loot cycles that you could see, and these avatar cycles that you could also see, and there was the timing cycles that you could also see, and then sometimes there was a coordinate cycle that you could also see, and then so you start putting these all together, and that's kind of why the website and the program that's why I started that, is because you could start to see when you start putting this stuff into spreadsheets that wait a minute, there's something here. And spreadsheets just weren't going to cut it. I needed more data. I need to be able to zoom out. I can't just do it with this little window. I can see there's something in the window, but I can't see it without zooming out. And to zoom out, you need data, you know? So, and I'm kind of talking, looking at my keyboard because I'm kind of thinking about all this stuff. So I apologize. You know, it's just kind of how I am trying to organize it in my head and all that. Trying to keep it sane. I hope I am. Kind of like some history. So, and I guess there's well, let me think about this. So yeah, I guess that's where we leave it with Never Die is, I really respected it. I spent a lot of time coming on my second time around, noobing it up on his lower creatures there because his the way he designed it was 4 players, and people don't really realize how all the mobs are condensed. It's built for high end players, and most high end players don't even understand like how genius it is really on how he got all these mob spawns. And it's really, if you're a high player, you pretty much kind of understand. You're not running around wasting time. There's efficiency stuff that's added in there that nobody else really thinks about. But I respected it enough to where I spent a lot. And the one thing I'll say about that is that it made him hundreds of thousands of ped from my cycling. Just because when I was collecting data, I would rather pay him because I knew he was a straight up guy. So I'd rather pay him taxes because I guess I'll pivot here on the taxes because don't think I I don't think I went over it on this one yet. So the taxes, here's the basis of the taxes that I've got. Back then, the forums were a big deal. It's a good place to go. There's the guy who did the loot thing, gave me the idea on stamina and how that might affect things later down the road. And that kind of ties in a little later. The other thing about the forums is back then it was a different time back then for Mindark in the way that their vision was different than what it turned out to be. And I'll explain it this way: is that there's a podcast that I saw, and the podcast was done in Australia on ABC News. And the reason we can't find that podcast is because the Deathifier lawsuit was one of the longest lawsuits in gaming history, I'm pretty sure, regarding virtual assets and who owned what and how much of what does who own. And there was a couple aspects of that suit, but they had frozen a lot of the media around that because it was back then Deathfire was kind of a big deal in his own country of Australia for the fact that he had Treasure Island, and Treasure Island was its own thing that was making a lot of money for him. It was really popular back then. Same thing with the asteroid. It was good times. People were mining there, people were hoffing there, people were getting all kinds of stuff all the time. People were doing activities. He was making just a ton of money, getting press at home. So they did a few things on him, like here's a video gamer who bought like an island, and he has an island, and that inspired me in some ways. Kind of all these guys inspired me in their own ways to follow kind of their footsteps, because it was like Octuma was inspired me for crafting, and of course like the Russian dudes, and then Never Die kind of inspired me for the, I don't know, kind of the management aspect of events and things like that. So there's a lot of inspiration back then. But so there's a podcast, and it was on ABC News, and the whole idea was we did this story on Deathifier, and now we want to hear from the company. And so it was Mindark, and I think it was Bjorn, and I'm not exactly sure but it was a guy it was a blonde dude in a ponytail, Swedish dude, right? It's probably all of them. or at least back then. Maybe it was Marco. I don't remember the names to the faces, but it was a tall, lanky dude with a ponytail, blonde hair, Nordic looking. Probably a tall alien white. Whatever it is. But anyway, he was from Mindark, and he was doing this podcast with the reporters, and they were asking him like, okay, so what's the premise of the game? Why is he so interested? Why is this working for him? Why does he have money coming out of this game? And back then, Mindark was on a path of they had a company that was going to buy Calypso, and it was SEE, I think it was. And some of my details might be fuzzy, but it's generally kind of what went down. Is there's a company that was going to buy Calypso for like 6 million, something like that, and they were going to buy the planet and they were going to operate it, and they were going to manage the taxes and the content and all that stuff. So Mindark's plan at that point was we're getting out of the tax game. We're going to become a content provider. And we're going to be the people that you come to where we're the warehouse. If you need a mob, we're going to design your mob. We're going to implement your mob. We're going to put the mob into the whole loot system. And then we're going to provide the mob for you and you'll pay us for it. And that was their whole model, what they were really wanting to do. They just wanted to be the graphic design team for all these new different planets who have their own ideas about how they want to do stuff. They didn't really want to get involved with managing their own because there's a lot of kind of tricky things about that. But it was, that's kind of what the plan was, is this company's going to buy it. So during the interview, he was explaining it as, which is why it's so profound to me and why I remember it so well. We've looked far and wide. We did figure out it was ABC News in Australia, but we also figured out that they deleted it. And we the only thing we can assume is that the lawsuit somehow, because it's like a 6 or 7 year lawsuit, that somehow there was some kind of we don't want that out while the lawsuit is going, or that doesn't help our side, or something. So I think it got kind of muffled because of the lawsuit, ultimately. That's the only thing I think of. But we couldn't find it. But what I remember of it is that he was very specific on the fact that because they had no motivation to collect taxes anymore, their goal, and and they were really excited about it, and rightfully so. It got me excited about it because the way he explained it was that taxes are kind of like real estate, which I already kind of understood pretty well, in that when a player comes and they want to buy the land, because they were talking about the Treasure Island, for example, they said the incentive is that when they buy the land, they're buying the revenue. And when they buy the revenue, they can kind of do whatever they want. They set the price, they can put whatever mobs they want on there. Now, there's a little bit of a cost, there's a maintenance fee, but ultimately, we want these people to succeed. We want to be able to provide them, because it was not only that they were going to provide planets with things, but they were going to go to, if a player said, hey, I want to do something on my land, then they were going to be the people who would be like, oh, we got guys for that. Let's make you something and we'll charge you for it. And you'd be, they did do that with a lot of different things like the teleporters and some of the shop add-ons. And, so they tried doing that model, but that was the general idea of what they were going to do as a company, is not collect taxes. So they explained it as such, and it intrigued me because it makes sense. It's like you buy an office building, and you have the right to divide it out however you want. And if you want to collect rent, you can collect rent. And if you want to sell a level of a building, like a land area, then you can get your capital back, and they can rent it. And that's how he kind of explained it to me, and that's really kind of struck me as that's genius, because it's ultimately what's going on in the game is that there's taxes everywhere. The whole game is taxed. Everything you do is taxed, except for crafting isn't really taxed because the materials are already taxed. So that would be like double taxation. It's not going to work, especially if you have to make a markup. So there isn't really a tax on the crafting stuff, as far as I'm aware. There might be like a little one in the background or something, but nothing significant that I can tell anyway. Yeah, nothing significant that I could tell in some of the data that I've, because there was a while there I was able to collect all the data, all the crafting data pretty easily, and then they changed that to where they made it tricky to collect it, probably for the reason they don't want people to understand a lot of these things. Because when that deal fell through, they all of a sudden it changes, because now the deal fell through. They own half of Calypso, and the other half, the CLD, was the other company. So that's what the deal was. The other company was going to buy half of Calypso. They were going to own half of Calypso, but they were going to try to deed that off to players or this other company eventually, or whatever it was. But they were kind of shifting away from owning the land. But then that fell through. So then now they own half the planet, and now they've got this kind of half the planet that's in limbo that was supposed to go to this company that I think they probably, there was some kind, probably some legal or contractual things that they maybe had to finagle around. I don't know the details, but in any case, they had to keep, the SEE side of the deal turned into the CLDs, which is the Calypso land deeds. And so that's what half of the revenues of all of Calypso was, is the land deeds. And so right off the bat, kind of like how the deeds work in the first place is, when you're on Calypso and you're on a non-taxed area, your radar will show that your taxes, that there's no tax. When you go to a land area that's owned by a player, it's going to pop up and it'll show you this. It'll pop up and it'll show you this. It'll pop up and it'll show you what they're charging for their tax. And so when you buy the land, when you buy the deed, you're buying the tax. That's what you buy. You're not buying really anything else. And that's why you buy it. That's the motivation that he was pretty clear on in the thing of, like, why would we sell these things if it's not motivational? So we want these people to be able to set a tax. If they can generate events or generate enough people to come in at 10% tax and make a ton of money, good for them. We want them to have that control. So the whole idea was, so in the game you go into player land and it shows you 5% or 2.99% or whatever the player set. But then you leave that land area and you go to the main lands that are non-player owned, and it doesn't show any tax anymore. And so there's this huge misconception that those areas don't have any taxes, and that all the player areas are just going to rip you off because they're the ones that are charging you 5%. Look at that. But the reality is that those taxes are there. They're just hidden. And the proof of that is that, CLD used to do it. They changed it up because I don't think they really want people to understand it. And here's why they don't anymore. It's not that they're hiding the tax system from people. It's that the game has always been, you've got to figure it out for yourself. It's your fault for not figuring it out. It's our fault for not figuring it out. I'll put it that way. So it's always kind of been designed that way, but they're just not saying it. So it's not that they're withholding it, but they're just not going to define it, because all of a sudden, because that deal fell through and they own half of Calypso, their model changed. They can't just be the provider anymore. They're relying on these taxes. And these taxes, the taxes and the event systems that they've got going, have generated so much revenue reliably for them, they can't stop doing it. Because they've got people to, they've got a crew to pay. So they not only are doing the content for all the planets, which is good revenue for them, but they now also have to manage these events on Calypso to make sure to keep the player base on their planet, because now guess what? They're in the tax game. So they're not going to tell you, yeah, the whole tax system is based off the fact that you're going to compete with us. They're just not going to do it. It's not going to be, but they're not going to, it's not like they're saying, it's not like they're lying about it and they're saying, oh, yeah, it's, you know, we're free. They've never said that. They've never once said it. It's just that they're just omitting the fact of how it really is working because of the fact that now we're competition. All the landowners are competition. Anytime we throw up an event, it pulls away their revenue. So, in a weird way, what used to be the motivation for the idea of we want to enrich these people to become whatever they can become, all of a sudden becomes wait a minute, we can't just do that because we also have to maintain our income. So that's kind of the basis of the difference on where people get that wrong. And to prove that, like the CLD Calypso land deeds. So that's half of the planet. And it's like $6 million, I think it was, with the deal when they were going to do it. But everybody's happy with those deeds because they pay out whatever percentage it was. I mean, every week they're paying out big money. And when they run events, they're paying bigger money. Why is that? Well, it's everything that's not taxed on Calypso and everything that they run an event that's on Calypso or space or anything like that. They're making tax revenues on all that stuff. That's where the CLD is half of the tax revenues of all of those things. So on one hand, they're making revenue for themselves, but they're also guaranteeing a really good return for the CLD owners because they're prioritizing CLD over the privatized areas, over Treasure Island, over, and then like Treasure Island is another example for you because clearly everybody's getting income, but if that represents half of Calypso and there's no taxes, and then if it was double taxation, people would notice it right away because you're going to notice 5 + 5. That's going to be 10%. That's going to be hitting everybody. Nobody be able to play the game at 10%. You know, so it just can't work the way that a lot of people assume that it works, and some of these larger players who kind of are more recent to the game, they don't have the history of the game, they don't really understand where Mind Arc was supposed to be or wanted to be. They don't really understand the whole basis of the game was around taxes. It's the whole design. And if you look at the patents, interesting sidebar on that is that the patents were done in 2003, and I think they got effective 2006. I don't know. I've got them on there, but it was a guy that was in MindArc that made the patents for virtual trading in virtual economies. But it was a couple different patents. One was on how the trading works, and then one is how the hardware works to link it to the real world. So it's an actual whole patent system that's designed around taxes. It's designed around the fact that we're paid, and it's stated in the patent that we're paid based off of our time in the way of skills, and then also our prowess in business with markups because it's a player-based economy. But that's how we're compensated for our time in the game. And then how owners of the virtual property are compensated through the taxation and markup. So it's actually how the game is designed is that it's taxed. It's a tax based system. And like I said, I don't have. I don't know. I'll try to look up the links and try to get them, but I don't remember where I put them. But there you can look them up online. It's methods for virtual trading online or something like that. But it's an Igor something or other, and he worked at MindArc at the time. So it's not a MindArc patent. It's the guy who came up with the patent. And there was another. So there's like 3 patents, I think, total. But the interesting sidebar about that is that Meta couldn't do Metaverse until that patent went out because they own the patent for all the only game, which is why it gets such a weird, like, How come nobody else did it? Because they had a patent. The only other game that got grandfathered in was not EverQuest, Life, Next Life. What was that one? Life something life. Maybe it was Next Life, something like that. I forget what it was, but you guys probably understand what I'm talking about. But it was another virtual economy game. It's the only one that could exist because MindArk has a patent. And the only other one that I saw that tried was a Russian game, and it was actually very cool. I played it for a while, and I did pretty well in it. Actually, I was kind of like one of the top players in that little game. It was a neat. It was a few players from Entropia. They started Afterworld, which is just a. There was like four devs, but they came up with this kind of copy of Entropia, and they had tried to make it the same thing, but they couldn't make it happen because MindArk was they own that shit. And so metaverse couldn't happen until that patent died off. So it's a really kind of interesting history on how they capitalized the whole industry. So that's why Entropia was doing so good all those years, is because nobody else could really do it. They had to wait until the patent paid out, and then nobody, because of all the big gaming companies, they had more funding or money or something, but nobody really wanted MindArk to ever really become famous for the fact that I don't know if they ever got bigger, or if people realized what it was. I don't. It's kind of bizarre to me that it's existed for 20 years, you know, and it's got like $250 million of annual turnover. So it's like a small country, of economy, and still, to this day. So it's a bizarre thing. So yeah. So where am I now? I'm not sure where I left off on this. So anyway, the taxes. So the taxes are they're part of the game, and to prove that the CLD, we've got the CLDs, and everybody's happy with those, and nobody's asking why. Why are these paying so much? Why is it when events happen? Why is it going up? This is awesome. The events are paying good, but then nobody's putting two and two together to realize I must be paying for that because I'm doing the event. So it's like, and when you pay attention to it, because it's real money. To me, for the beginning, it's always been, it's like, this is real money. Why are people not looking at it? And then, you talk to a bunch of people and it's like, oh, okay, well, what's your spreadsheet say? They'll be like, oh, I don't bother with the spreadsheet. I just play a game, and this one guy told me that this is how it works. And this one guy, he's been playing for like 4 years. He's awesome. And, he's got to know what he's doing because he's telling me he's making all kinds of money. A lot of times those guys aren't making money. I can tell you that much because I've been in those societies, and those guys complain probably worse than new players on their losses, and they beat themselves over, and it's sad to watch. It really is sad to watch because they'll spend all kinds of money just chasing it and saying, "Oh, it's coming." That one big one's coming, and it's like, that's not the game. It's not a gambling game. It's not. There's not like a big win coming. It's just a numbers game. It's a law of averages that nobody's beating because nobody pays attention to it. So there's a small handful of people that will actually pay attention to it. And the few people that I've run across that understand the tax system pay attention to it. They're writing it down. They wrote their own program. They have spreadsheets of crazy detail. So it's interesting because it's like that comment, you're just lying about the taxes. You have no proof. You don't know what you're doing. And it's like, it's 20 years, been doing this 20 years. I've owned multiple land areas. I did it because I didn't believe it for myself. I did all this stuff because I didn't believe it for myself. I had to figure it out, So the tax system definitely is there. And I'll bring this other example. Treasure Island was the Death of Fire lawsuit, basically. Like, or that was like the big asset that was in limbo for the longest time because of that lawsuit. And so when he lost, Mindark got it back. And so what did they do? When Death of Fire had it, it was whatever he had it at 5%, 2%, whatever it was. It was set at a certain tax rate when you go into the radar, or in the land area, the radar will say, "Oh, the player owns this." So Mindark takes it over. They decide to deed it out to the players, and the players play a collective, whatever it was, like, $100,000 for that land area, right? Far more than I'm asking for my land area, by the way. Far, far more. Far, far more. Like what they paid Never Die for his land, far, far more. Like, this is the deal. This is the deal because this is what they're worth, if you run them right. So Treasure Island, they take them back and they decide they're going to sell for whatever it was, $100,000. I should look it up. It's something silly when you think about it because it's just Treasure Island, and it's like $100,000, and people bought that in a day. A day, it's gone. Nobody can buy it anymore. It's like people gobbled it up. People gobbled it up, and why do they gobble it up? Because they want that revenue. They want that revenue. And where's that revenue coming from? Well, now when you go there, guess what? There's no tax thing. There's no thing telling you who owns it and there's 5%. It's blank. There's nobody owns it anymore. It's tax free, damn it. But yet you still bought those things for that revenue. Where's that revenue coming from? It's coming from the tax. The tax is just hidden. That's the only difference. It's the only difference. It's hidden and it's not hidden. If you're a player-owned area, it's not hidden. And that's because they can vary. And when you buy a planet for $1 million, part of that comes with a not a security, but like a blanket, like a privacy feature that you don't have to show your taxes to people. You just bought $1 million planet. We're going to give you that. You don't have to show your taxes to anybody. But when you want to get capital and you want to sell that land area to somebody, you want to get your, whatever, $20,000 out of your game, or, to pay some devs, or you have a new project idea or whatever, you can go sell that land, but you're not going to get taxed for that land anymore. You just sold it to the player. And so that's the whole thing that people don't get about the taxes. And I really wish people could just stop and think about it. How could it work otherwise? Because it's not that Treasure Island was double taxed before. It's the only difference is who owns the tax. Now it's the players who own the tax, that it's a hidden tax. And Mindark controls the lever. So Mindark controls the lever. They're not going to control the lever because there's no benefit for them because they're getting 5% off the total value for just the management fee. So Mindark gets a small management fee. They have no incentive to really raise the taxes or lower the taxes. They have some incentive to kind of add some events or more content here and there to keep the deed holders happy. Because if the deed holders aren't happy or people don't go there, there's no tax revenue. And then people complain and they say, "Oh, we don't get any taxes." And, so it becomes, and then people start coming off with their, we're not getting taxes. I must be getting double taxed, because there's not enough here, whatever it is. And it's you just have to think about it. It's not a lie to say that. I mean, it's just not lying. That's what a lot of people think. They think it's a lie that the tax system, that if you own a land, your only incentive to tell people about the tax system is that you're going to get more taxes than Mindark. And there's no way in hell that us little players are going to get more money than Mindark when it comes to the taxes. It's, for one thing, they don't really care if you buy the land because somebody got the money. Somebody paid, you're paying them money for the land. So that part of it, they don't really care about that as much as long as they can sustain on other things. But there is a difference now because they own taxes that they're never going to disclose it because of the fact that they're competition. You're competition. So it's that's just what it is, and you can't understand it really. You can't, it's really hard to see it unless you start doing the tracking. And so I'll kind of go into, let me make sure that I've kind of got, I think that kind of covers like most of how the taxes work. I hope it covers how the taxes work. And I'll kind of show you here with mine. So I've kept a spreadsheet for this land area I'm selling. So I'll pop up this spreadsheet here and I'll kind of go over where we're at here. Now I stopped recording some of this stuff in like 2024, just because I just stopped. It was all paid off at some point, and I just stopped doing the recording of it. But this is the Rocktropia land kind of spreadsheet, and so this is all of the payouts and fertilizer and all that stuff. I kept it all, just because I'm all into the data, So I bought it in June of 12th of 2020. And so you could see is like I got it. I got all excited. I was playing with it. And so I've got, total earned at least for what I recorded was 120. There's $287,000 that had been cycled, 2.8 million ped that had been cycled in total. I was keeping all my fertilizer expenses per day, what settings I had, how much fertilizer I'd stocked up, and it just kind of was eaten down in that regard over the years. And then I've got just some data on like what fert costs I had and what some of the settings cost per day. It's kind of standard across all land areas. But I had like my withdrawals, like I did 16% return on withdrawals, 38% on withdrawals that year, 31% return. And those were withdrawals. I think there was some other expenses like this is 46%. So I don't remember. Maybe that's with the shop included. I don't remember what I was doing with that, but maybe that's shop income. I don't remember. But this is the daily income. So this is just kind of a record of all of the things that I've done with it. But as you can see, I mean, it's paid on days that I really, really pushed it to where it was like 10-hour days. It was $1,000 a day or 1,000 ped a day. Really kind of hard for me to do 10 hours. One of the downsides, I'm not as young as I used to be. I generally made it a habit to play 1 or 2 hours a day. And a lot of this stuff is like these here, this is multiple hours a day. But when we start getting down to after I had gotten level 100 and a lot of stuff, this is just me coming down and like generating taxes for whatever. And it was, I think this was at 2% tax. And at 2% tax, it was 40 ped an hour that I would get. So I wouldn't quite get a payout unless I did 2 hours. So a lot of these 80 ped, close to 80 ped payouts were like 2 hour days where I just wanted a guaranteed payout. Or maybe I did those 2 days and then I got that payout. And those 2 days and I got that payout. But it was like an hour a day. So some days I would go in and get, 1 hour, and maybe I got a couple extra globals that day to go over 40 ped. But that's kind of generally what I had been doing over the years. Once I passed the skills, and really having to hustle to pay it off because it was already paid off. At some point down here. And close enough paid off between Mutation Station, because Mutation Station was the other land area that I owned. And so I was working that one as well. So there was a couple hours here I'd go spend a couple hours on the other one. Playing around with the DNA settings. And I guess that's where I'll kind of pivot on an extended version of why a land area is good. We've kind of gone over like why there's taxes how it's lucrative on that front. But that's like a small part of the puzzle for what I do. And a lot of people got frustrated with me because of the way that I always had my settings on like stalkers when I was more active, when I could go and hunt there every day, for example. And there's multiple reasons for that, and I'll kind of go over. So taxes are the primary reason that you own a land area. You're buying the tax. You get to control it from 0% to 10%. You get to control however it's coming in. If you run events, you can bring in a lot of taxes if you bring enough quality players, enough prizes, all that jazz. They can be very, very lucrative. I never really did them because I'm just not social, for one. For two, I used my land for me. And it sounds kind of it sounds weird. It sounds bad. I'm pretty sure whenever I say it, because anytime I say it in text or whatever, I'm sure it just sounds like shit. But that's what it is. It's me running it for me. I didn't buy the land so that I could run events because I tried doing that. I'm not very good at it. It's just not something I'm good at. I'm not that social. You know, I think it's cool to do stuff like that. I'm just not very good at it. I can't come up with the right it's just I'm not good at it. There's people like the Lucky Seven event on Arcadia. That was an amazing event. Huge money made. Like huge money made on that. You made $10,000 doing events like that. It's crazy how much money you can make. Very well run, but it's very hard to really do that well. You really have to. And they really got into the stats of kind of how the numbers are working. When you're doing lucky sevens, just by the math of it, it doesn't. You're always going to win. As the owner, but the players. It was enticing enough of an event that we had so many players that we joined. So there's events that are very lucrative. I didn't do them as much. When I did them, on Rocktropia, there's one part of that is that Rocktropia back then didn't really get the quality of players. Good on new players if you have all low maturity stuff. You'll get some decent revenues off low players. But the difference is like I could get 15 low players to come and cycle for an hour, or I can cycle an hour on my high end equipment. So that's why it becomes more for me, is because there's ultimately multiple reasons to use it. There's the taxes for one. When I hunt on my land, I'm not on another land paying somebody else tax. Everything goes into my own cycle. So like all the taxes that I would have been paying to somebody else just goes into that tax fund. The game stays the same. I'm just playing the same. I'm just able to pull that tax back out, which ends up being significant. It's like 100 pet a day for an hour, you know? And then that's only the one aspect of it, though, because not only do you have the taxes that you're generating and not paying, but you've got the skills that you generate. This is a repeatable mission. So and this will also tie into maybe I won't do that yet because it also ties into the stamina. You get to control the mob. So you can pretty much put whatever mobs you want. And I've proven that by putting an Aatrox on my Rocktropia land and Nakanu on my. Nakanu doesn't even exist on Rocktropia until I put it on my land. So you can put whatever DNA you want on your land because you control it. It's yours. As long as you get the DNA, you can put whatever you want. And so by doing that, when you have DNA, when you have a mob, it's not just that you own the creature. And a lot of people misunderstand that a creature has like a certain loot pool that's for like the whole creature. And it's not true because when you own the land, you get to set the maturity. So a young maturity is only going to get like animal oil, like muscle oil and eye oil, like on my cool cats, for an example. And then they're only going to get like tier 1 and tier 2 comps, like 101% stuff. It's like very low markup, almost TT junk, But if you set them to stalkers, it changes. You're getting spleen oil all of a sudden, and you're getting tier 6 comps all of a sudden. And it depends on, and then the Rocktropia loot changes a little bit, and your ESI rate changes a little bit, and so you're controlling the loot all of a sudden. It's not just taxes; you control the loot. So one of the big things that my bread and butter is that I have the largest blueprint collection in the game. I get to pick whatever markup is working out of 2,400 different things. So I get to choose the markup. If the markup is best at 150% on this, awesome. If it goes down to 120%, whatever, I'll go to another thing that's up to 160% this week. So it's like I get to move around on the markups, and then there's certain, because of that range of blueprints, I can do more with spleen oil than anybody else in the game, and I can do more with all the other oils, and as far as converting it to markup. So I could take the already better than young oils markup oil and convert that into other things like, for example, spleen will get you into higher blueprints. And higher blueprints, for example, if you farm them on certain planets with certain blueprints, you can end up looting blueprints that are worth tons of money. And then your blueprint looting process ends up gaining more than the actual product sales of the blueprint. So there's like aspects like that if you know how to play the oil game, if you control the oils, it helps you control that game, the markup game on the crafting side. So when I say that the land has been for me, it's for one, it saved me on my taxes while I hunt, and because my kit is so efficient, it's efficient enough to where there's no real cost going out when I own the land. You know what I'm saying? There's no negative. There's no loss. There's still fertilizer costs, and that's what's contributing to the loot and the things of that nature and the ESI rate. And there are some things where changing the fertilizer rate changes these different things, like how much you're going to get ESIs and other things of that nature. And then also some of the skills, and then like the big one is like the mission. So that's another part of it. So you've got the taxes, and then you've got the being able to control the loot by way of the maturity. And then you've got the where am I going with this? So you've got the loot, you control the taxes with maturity. You're also controlling the markups within the maturities. And where am I going with this? I know there's another point that I have. I mean, there's a couple other. Okay, so I'm able to pick my markups through that. So that's another money making opportunity that I'm using on that front. The skill gain while I get it is another front, and the mission is the other front because this is a repeatable mission. So this mission is a 82 ped 84 ped repeatable mission of bioregen, melee combat, and evade. And so it's a repeatable mission. And with the efficiency of my skill set and the amount that I can cycle is $200 a day. So, or $2,000 a day. I can cycle up to $2,000 a day, which is $200 in ammo an hour. And so that $200 in ammo an hour at 5%, it's going to make, or what? Well, at 4%, it's going to make the 82 ped that we're looking at. So, that's generally what I've had it as, at 4.2%. I did lower it to 2% for the longest time, but I wasn't quite at 5% because I don't need to be, because I'm already kind of making ahead, right? All I need the taxes for is to pay off the land. The benefit that I'm getting, the reason that it's been good to have land is because the skills that I've gained in the meantime is another $20,000, $30,000, something ridiculous. And then there's also some of the crafting gains that I've gained along the way. So it's not like I haven't made money beyond the land. The land is just kind of like a I'm just selling it for what I bought it for, basically. So it's not like I'm really making money on land. It's I've already made the money on land, you know. So so you've got the tax, you've got the loot that you can control. I keep losing my mind on this last point here, and I don't know why. But anyway, so I've got the shop. I'm using the Rocktropia stuff to sell Rocktropia stuff in the shop. I know this is an important point. The skills. Okay, sorry. Okay, so the mission, we'll go into the skills here. So you can see there's revenues. Some days I didn't play, some days I played, some days other people played, but it's mostly been for myself. And here's another example of why. And I'm going to tie this in a weird way to stamina. Okay. So it's a 90 ped repeatable mission, which is worth about it was up to 3,800 ped every time you complete the mission. If you just sold the skill off, if it was bio regen at the top dollar at whatever point it was, it's generally I think it's like 2,400 ped, something like that. That the mission reward is ultimately worth. I get at stalker level because I can control. It's another aspect. I can control the mob level. So at stalker level, I can do the mission within. I could do 1,000 points of the mission within an hour, and I need 2,100 points to repeat the mission, or 21,000 points to repeat the mission. So it's 21 hours at stalkers with my gear and skill and running $200 an hour to do the mission. So it's 2,000 ped an hour in ammo times 21 is it's 42,000 ped per run. So it's $4,200 in ammo that you spend, but you're getting 2,400 back plus all your loot back. Most of the loot back if you're high efficient, you're in the 90s anyway. So the skills are already paying for most of your losses. And I'll go into the interesting thing about like, kind of owning the land and being able to do all the data collection. So you run across this thing that I mentioned, the stamina thing, where it was mentioned that part of the loot had stamina in it, and that all of a sudden they start coming out with the biggest missions had stamina as rewards. And so I focused early on in the game of I want to get stamina. I want to they want to push it on us. They're giving it a value for whatever reason. I'm going for stamina no matter what I do. So that's how I played the game. I finished all the missions I could. That was my goal. Like, where's my next stamina point? And it was like my freakish thing that I did in the background that nobody really picked up on or did otherwise. And it was all because of this stupid post. Just what if, just in case, right? So I started gathering stamina and I started realizing, okay, well, wait a minute, my skills are climbing super, super fast. And part of the reason, like I went to Mind Force, for example, is you start realizing the Mind Force has a smaller skill set. And so the value in that is that if you're doing this for the money, because it's a real cash game, when you have a higher skill set like a BLP, you've got like 14 skills in there, whatever it is. Mind Force only has like 8 skills in there. So it's got like concentration, Mind Force harmony, and things like that. But there's not all the extra of added, athletics and courage and all that kind of stuff in the skill set for the profession. So it goes up a lot quicker. So there's differences between these professions in how they will gain. And then, you start paying attention to that and you start realizing that skills are changing. The skill rate is changing based off of your stamina. Because if you're focusing on stamina all the time, it's constantly changing but not quite to the rate that you're gaining all these different like rewards, or just going about your day. So the big thing about this, damn it, I was just trying to avoid my lost train of thought. So the biggest part about this skill thing is that you've got the 2400 ped coming back every 20 hours. And you've spent your 41,000 ped and you've got back your 41,000 ped plus maybe a little bit more. And maybe you hopped in there. Maybe you had a bad cycle, because your avatar will go into a bad cycle every once in a while. But over the long window, you can kind of see how it works. And the thing that I notice, and where I'm going with this skill thing here, is that this is an example of me taking Evader, and my skills at the time was 9190, and this particular gain I gained 131 experience because I was at level whatever prof it was, 82 I think prof is what that's saying. So, and like here's an example, like here's a guy that came out here, he had 101% return. He's got a really good setup. He's a really good hoobler. I don't know. I mean, most people will probably know who he is because he's a good player. I mean, really excellent high efficiency gear. He had 101% return on this land. That's with taxes. So that's because my taxes were lower. And like one example of like, like here's, okay, I'll go with this. The skill curve, everybody knows that there's a skill curve. The skill curve is pretty crazy when it comes down to it. I have 20,000 points of pyrokinesis, for an example. If I sell that, here's a better example. Taz B, he's another player. He did one round of this repeatable mission. And he had no melee combat because he was a fairly new player. And so he claimed the mission one time. He went from 266 points to 4,231. So it was 4,000 points basically of skill for 90 ped reward. That's with like starting from zero. If I go all the way down here to like my last one that I did, I gained 91 points for that same mission, same reward. The only difference is I'm at 101 or I'm at over 100k points. So there's a huge difference in how many points you're gaining because that's the skill curve. You get more points when you're early, you get less as it goes up. So the thing about stamina is really interesting that I was able to determine with this deal. Like here's bio regen, okay? So here's me doing bio regen. I gain 66 points. I go from 99 to 100, from prof 99.23 to 94 or 94.23 to 94.53. I gain 0.3 on my prof because I'm at 94. I only gain 66% or 66 points. Oh, that's when I was selling them. Never mind. Let me use this because the other thing is I've been selling bio regen like since I've owned the thing. So it's like always whenever I have an extra, like almost always I've got a bio regen and a pyrokinesis like for the last few years for sale. So I'm always selling skills. So it's another method of generation. So there's the taxes. There's being able to control the loot. If you're a crafter, you get the generation of income that way because you're able to game the blueprints and the markups at your discretion. If you're like me, and you have all the options. And then the skills you can all the skills that you're gaining during the hunt are sellable, so that's worth of value as well. So you're gaining money on the taxes, you're gaining money on the being able to magnify your loot into markup, and then you're also making money on your skills, which is in the patent. That's what they're paying your time for. So an example of this is that, as everybody knows, your skills go down as you go through stuff. So you'll go, you might claim one thing, and you would expect that the next time you claim it, you get less points because you're a higher level. If you keep claiming it and you keep jumping up, you keep getting higher, the points should be dropping, if that makes sense, because you're getting higher, the curve is there. The curve is going to give you less points the higher you go. And so the difference is that here we are on my Evader Prof at okay. Here we are on my Evader Prof at 85.98. Is this where I want to be? That's where I want to be. Yeah, okay. Sorry, I'm trying to figure this out. So, yeah, 85.98 was my professional level of Evader at this point. And it went up to 86.15. And I gained 92, so 68 points. 67.99. There it is right there. So I gained this 67 points, and I started doing my I think I was doing Cyrene or something, but I started keeping track of the stamina, because the thing you notice about the stamina is that it changes the curve. So, as you would expect, every time that you have a higher professional level, you should be getting less skill. But as you can see here, I've got 116 stamina here, I get 67 points. I gained 2 more stamina, I end up all of a sudden gaining 93 points. And my professional level is 86.52. It's even higher than it was when I left. So I did a bunch of stuff between this to get the 2 stamina. I think it was Cyrene doing the rhinos or whatever they are. And so I gained 2 stamina within this period of time, and then gained whatever evade from whatever I was doing in that time frame. But as you notice, I've got 2 more stamina, and I gained more experience for the same, because the ped value doesn't change anytime you claim the mission. It's always going to be 84 ped. So I should be getting less than 67, but because I raised my stamina, it's multiplying. It's altering the math. So now I've got 93 points for the same skill mission. The only difference, I have two more stamina. The next one I do is I have 1 more stamina from that, and I gained 97. And I went from 86.59. And actually, this is one of the times where I started selling, because I was over 100K, and I only sell my skills when I'm over 100K. So I was starting to sell my skills at this point. So I did start this mission at a lower point. I started this at 86.59, which is still more than the 86.52 I started with on the one before, but I gained 97 points. And then the next one was 120 stamina. And then I gained 115 points, and I was at 86.98. So I was even more professional level and more total skill points, because I was at 101.93. And then I started this one with 101.97. So I had more skill points, gained more skill per claim, so to speak. So there's a little bit of a value difference there that people that's not calculated right generally, because as you can see, if I'm getting 115 points of my evade skill for the same value of ped, when I cash this out, at this point, 11 ped will take out 8. No, at this point, it's 12 points. It'll it's almost 1 ped per. So it's like 12 points for a 12 ped ESI, something like that. At level at 100 at 10k points for a skill, if that makes sense. So if I gained 115 experience and then I get a ESI and you chip the ESI back out based off of the points, and I say I want to chip out my 115 experience points, it's a higher value than it was for the 93 experience points or the 67 experience points. You see what I'm saying? So there's definitely a factor of stamina affecting skills. So where I'm going with this is that it's not only affecting your skill gain and benefit on the repeatable mission and value of your repeatable mission, because it's ultimately based off of the points of the value, not the actual ped value, because you chip out the points. Yeah, I don't know if it makes sense. It's weird though. And I haven't quite figured out why it is like this. It might be that it's a variable, that there's a window that I'm hitting, and that I just happen to hit it like at the top end just a little bit higher each time or something. But there's something affecting it, and it's variable. I mean, it's you can see it, and it's not explicitly because of the curve. There's something else, and the only thing that I can tell, as you can see, is like me saying, okay, what's my stamina between all these things? And that seems to be the thing that's altering it to such a drastic degree. And that's all because I focused on stamina because of that stupid little post that guy made, that I thought, well, what if, you know? So what I found in to get around all this stuff here, what I found in owning this land area is that there's not only taxes, there's not only the loot options that you can create, but there is the skill generation. And that a mission like this, I don't know, it's just pretty crazy because the skills that you add up, not only for the mission, I haven't exactly done the math on it, but I do know that from like when I sell, like, ESIs loot fairly often on these mobs on my land area when they're set on higher settings. So when I loot them, I'm cashing out pyrokinesis or bioregen or evade or anything that's over 10,000 points. But when I'm cashing out like bioregen or like pyrokinesis, I get a 12 ped chip. It ends up being 6 points because I'm at 20,000 points now. Those 6 points take me like 2 hours to gather. But I have this skill set that I gained my evades and my concentrations and all these other skills collectively at such a rate that just selling skills is the profit because of the way that I've designed my avatar. And there was another video where somebody said, because I was going through how to sell your skills, because it's something that I've been doing for years. And somebody had posted in that one that, oh, you'll ruin your avatar. You're going to ruin your avatar. You have no idea what you're doing. And it's another mindset of like the tax thing of like people get this idea, whether from an Uber or some random post, that they get the idea and it makes sense to them. And I can't fault people. We all have our, I had all kinds of crazy theories in the beginning, like spiral mining theories and shit, so it's not like I haven't been through I think it works this way and find out that I'm wrong, or, it has happened. But it's the same kind of thing where people think that the taxes work this way because they read it about it and they don't think about, well, it can't work without it being taxed. And then, you've got this skill system that people don't even realize that that's the basis of the patent, was that they're paying you for skills based off your time, and that it really only makes sense when you look back on it, when they're pushing all the stamina, and when the one guy pushes the thing, at least to me, you know, that they were telling us the whole time that it's up to us to figure this shit out. And nobody sat down and figured this shit out to be able to say, oh, okay, wait a minute, there's something behind all this. It actually makes some crazy sense when you really look at it. The way the patent's designed, the way all the curves work, the way that the skills actually gain more value because of this. To where not only am I making money on the taxes, not only am I making money on my crafting and the loot, but I'm making money on a multiplied scale on the skills. And that's an underrated part about this game that people really don't understand, because nobody wants to sell their skills. So they never understand it because they never go through it. And I've sold at least 500,000 skills at this point. Yeah, at least 500,000 skill points at this point. Because, like I said, I've just been selling them left and right, and that's one of the reasons I don't have to. I've never had to deposit in like years, is because of the fact that I've been selling my skills while everybody wants to hold on to them, and they're not even realizing how much value it is. And the only reason I really know that is because in 2008, when I cashed out, I had $25,000, and I thought, what the fuck happened? How did this happen? That was just some skills I had. And it was mostly crafting skills, a couple blueprints, yeah. But that's really, that $25,000 was skills. That's the value of the game. And then when I stumbled upon the patent later on, it's just like it clicks to you. Like, this is the design the whole time, and nobody's ever going to tell you about it because nobody actually even knows to look. Like, I don't know anybody else who looked up the patent. I don't know anybody else who looked up all this other stuff, you know? There was one guy who mentioned the patent to me, actually. No, I can't say that, and I wish I knew who that was. But it was a stream that somebody put me down that rabbit hole. But there's people you run across that they've seen different things like that, and you hear certain things, and some of them are theories you pick up on, and you think, oh, this is how it works, and then you're wrong, and some of them you're like, man, that guy was right, you know. And I hope I'm not going like way overboard on like making it too hard to understand, but it's a history of gaming that I fully understand, and I'm so thankful to be a part of, because it's such a wild thing that I took a bankruptcy and I turned it into like a 7-figure assets in the real world. Like, I'm driving a Cybertruck. It's paid for. I like have no rent. I have it's My life is completely changed by a video game, and I wish people really understood the magnet, the gravity of what that is for like gamers. It's been my dream my whole life. I never thought it would be real. I wouldn't believe it if somebody told me, like, that sounds like bullshit. I've been a gamer all my life. God damn it, I've never had that happen. So I can't blame people when they're skeptical, because it's such a bizarre fucking it's bizarre. It's just bizarre, but it's the reality I know. It's all I know. It's what I've been doing these past 20 years. And I wish people understood it, because it's such a fascinating thing to me. The whole thing, how it's designed is genius to me. How it hooks people psychologically is genius to me. How it pushes people to really figure it out without giving them an answer makes it the most challenging game that I've ever played in my life, for that one reason. You're not going to find the answer. They're never going to give it to you. You can only determine it by yourself if you push yourself hard enough to do it, and nobody wants to do that, And that's the only difference of where I'm at now that I can determine, is that I just sat down and started trying to see what was what. And I don't see too many other players doing that. And I wish more people did, because you start to see these patterns, and you start to see the beauty in how these algorithms are working together. And it's not a scam, because you can start to see that once you get the skills, and once you get the efficiency, and once you start to see that's what I need for this, and if I push my stamina up, I start gaining more value for my time, because now my skills I'm gaining at a higher rate. I can sell those as a higher rate. I can loot more at a higher rate because I've got a higher generation of ped flow. Like all these different things are fascinating to me that they're all levers we control. They're not levers that mind our controls. It's our control. But we don't even, it's not presented to us that way. And nobody sees it that way. But that's what it is. It's our levers, our control. We just have all our levers turned off. And we have to be able to like figure out like how do we turn it on? That's really the only, that's the genius of the thing. And so to kind of go through the ultimate, this is about just kind of showing how the taxes actually do exist, like Mutation Station, Rocktropia land. I mean, I've got the data. The taxes are there. The money generation there. It's like I don't really care if this account falls off the earth. I don't really care. I've gained so much out of this. I'm not looking for top dollar. If I wanted to price it at like the same value of Treasure Island per pixel, or the same value that Never Die is getting for his share per pixel, it's something ridiculous like $50,000 or $60,000 per pixel that you would pay for a player-owned land area versus what you're paying for your deeds. And that's another crazy part, that people will buy those deeds overnight and they're paying per pixel 3 or 4 times what they pay for a land area if they just bought the land area. It's crazy. It's crazy how all these numbers add up, But that's what I love about it. I've always loved about, just the whole, it's magical to me and I love it. And I've always loved it. And I wish more people saw how it's magical. And I understand how more people, how this, it's so hard. You kind of can't help but to hate it when you lose, because it's like it is like gambling in that way of how it feels. You feel like you didn't have control to do it, but the truth is we actually have all the control. We just don't, if you're not paying attention to it, you're just never going to see it. If you don't start putting the stuff down on a spreadsheet, you're never going to see how much you lose on your armor. You're never going to see how much you lose on your weapons. You never see, and then you can't make the adjustment to say, I need better armor. You can't say like, oh shit, my weapon is costing me a hell of a lot more than this other weapon I'm using. Why is that? I got to get rid of this weapon. Like that's what you got to do to win, but nobody does that. And then they're like, oh, that game sucks. It just rips you off. Well, yeah, it's going to rip you off if you're not paying attention. It's what it's going to do. It's going to do it. There's like a few people are going to win. Most people are going to lose, But I hope people can kind of understand that it doesn't have to be that way, because you just got to pay attention to it. And so that's the ultimate thing, is pay attention to your stuff. Taxes are real. They're there. It's there. It can't be double taxation. Start recording it. You'll see you can't be paying 10% when you go from non-player, non-taxed, quote, Calypso land to a player land area at 5%. You're not losing 10% every single time you go there, even though you think you are. And that's the other part of it, is when your efficiency is so shitty that you're always at 90%, you're never going to see it. You're never going to see it until you actually get the efficiency to see that variance, because that's the big part that people get, is they get these low efficiency stuff where they're already losing 10% off the bat. They're not at the top. It's only when you're at the top efficiency that you can really see the tax. And that's kind of an interesting part about it that's hard to convey, because you just won't see the tax variance as much when your variance is already that far off. You know what I'm saying? When you're already at 10% off base, you're not going to see it versus a 2% off base. Then you can see a 5%. You can't see a 5% within a 10. Not very easily, And likewise, if you're already at 10% because of your efficiency and you go to a taxed area, now you're what, 20%? That doesn't happen. It's not that bad. It might be that bad every once in a while, but it's not going to be that bad all the time, no matter what people tell you, unless they constantly are running without doing any changes and running all the shitty equipment with the shitty, then maybe you start getting into that. But you almost kind of have to really try hard anymore because they've made all these like more efficient noob weapons. So you kind of have to try hard anymore to really fuck it up like you used to with decay system. The decay system was brutal. And if you don't know what system was like, that's how I won events. You cycle the decay up into ridiculous amounts of money and it was going to come back to you. Because and that's the other part of the where you see that the game isn't a scam. You see that it's just a return on over time. And it's just the way that it works out. At least back then, it was really interesting how decay worked because you could stack decay. And like my swine, I won all kinds of events with that swine just on the fact that it was the highest decay, worst decay thing you can possibly get is like $400 an hour to run it. But you get the biggest loots out of it because you're losing so much so quick that when it pops back on to you, it's big. The modifier's way up there. All kinds of tricks like that in the game that you don't really, you just gotta pay attention. So I hope it explains the taxes. I mean, not that I have to convince anybody. I mean, you do however you want, but these are just kind of the experiences I've run across over 20 years of where I've formulated my basis of the game. And I still don't have any, I have no sour feelings for the game. Sometimes I disagree with how Mindark has done stuff. I think they're doing pretty good in the last recently. I think they're doing pretty good. But I have been real critical about how some of the decisions they make, but never about the game mechanics. Because from what I see of it and from what I've learned of it over the years, it's clear to me it's a brilliant system. I wish I could have come up with it. It's one of those things where you really think about it. It's so brilliant. It's captured people for 20 years already. And people are still invested in it. People are interested in this land already. And I only started putting it up. I expect it to last. It's a high dollar item. And because people don't understand the taxes and because people don't understand the other benefits of owning land, it's going to take me a while to sell. And that's okay. I don't have to. I'm not itching for the money. It's not something that I need to have right now. Thankfully, it's not like an emergency. I'm not medically needing the money for a surgery or some shit. But I do think it's sad that I own it and I don't. My CNC machine has got me so kind of occupied and I'm a little burned out on the game just because I did it for so long and I feel I've already beat everything. I did everything I wanted to do with hunting. Crafting, I'm finally past level 13s. That was the big end game for crafting. And I still do that. I'm still working that QR up a little bit. So I still log in daily to cycle peds because it's free ped. But it's not like I'm crossing my fingers to get this sold or anything like that. And it's not like I want to be pushing this whole tax idea on people just to sell my land because it doesn't, what you do with the land, that's really up to you. I mean, it's not my fault, but it's also not my fault when people buy land and they, if you ran events on it and did really well, it'd be my fault for not doing that over all these years where I could have made more money and I could have hunted it more for my own reasons and made more money off of it. But I've done, like I say, I've already generated all the taxes back to pay for the land, but the skills is like another $20,000-$30,000 over these years that I've gained from this land specifically that has sold over time and will continue to sell over time, hopefully, if everything goes well. Yeah, and big loots, like there's a 13,000 loot, I think was my biggest one on the land. So that's like $1,300. So that's paying off like 10% right there. So little things like that add up. So I don't know. I know it's a long form thing and I hope I kind of did the other one and I thought, it's kind of like a podcasty sounding thing, but it's also kind of good to know. I wish I kind of knew some of the details of how the skills work and how the value, where your value really is, which is really in skills and taxes. Is taxes, efficiency, and skills. So if you can maintain your if you can understand the tax system and limit it wherever possible, and if you can have the most efficient system wherever possible, and if you can generate skills the fastest wherever possible, those are the three factors of how you are making money. And then markups, markups are the big one. And if it takes money to buy the blueprints, but you get the markups. Hopefully, if you push it long enough over time, the blueprint will more than pay for itself, and then it's all free money from then on out. And that's kind of what I've been doing. It's like most of my blueprints, especially early on, I started with I buy this blueprint and I don't move to the next one until this one. So I like flew every planet for that item, and then I would drop it off on every planet with my quad or whatever it was every day or every week, and I would push that item until it made the blueprint cost back. And then I could move on and start taking those profits and then buy more blueprints. And then it steamrolls. But it's a crazy game. I love it. I hope that explains some more of the taxes, kind of some of the history of the game, some of the basis of what my theory is. And allegedly on whatever all this stuff on Mind Arc and Never Die and Death of Fire, all that stuff. I'm not proclaiming to know all the insider details or anything, but there's been some interesting. There's just interesting history in this, and it's such a. It seems to me it should be more popular, just on the concept of how it's possible that all these random people in the world have kind of like made legends of themselves in an unknown way. Like Death of Fire and Never Die, they got some press coverage. But there's a lot of players in the game that never got press coverage. And they're legends like Aktuma or Buzz. Like these guys are legends. They've been playing forever. Like the Neo Mavens and the Strikers and there's just so many over the years. It's crazy. But anyway, I'm going to end it because this is too long, probably. But if you stuck with it, I really appreciate it. I hope it was of value, and I hope you have a good day. Thanks for watching.